Hey, everybody, how's it going? Another week, another fun topic. So, I've been toying around with doing some videos talking about how to better debate things or discuss things as it pertains to, well, pretty much anything you can apply this to, but this applies a lot to hobby forums, Facebook, social media, etc. Because I find that there's a lot of, shall we say, hostility in those groups when it comes to people who have a disagreement on how things should be or on opinions. And one of the things that I've noticed a good deal of is that certain words get used quite a bit with seemingly fluid and interchangeable vocabulary definitions. And because that we use words that seem to have different meanings to different people, that leads to circular arguments where person A is defending a position based off of an idea of a definition of a word, and person B has a different definition for that same word, and so they just argue back and forth and never stop, because in today's social media world, we don't argue or debate to learn something. We argue or debate to win. It's not very constructive and doesn't make for positive experience. Now, today's word we're going to look at is below, and that's the word gatekeeping, or the term, I should say, gatekeeping. Now, the term gatekeeping gets thrown around very regularly in hobby spaces, not just tabletop wargaming. I see it a lot in role-playing game forums. I see it a lot in various other miscellaneous places where people congregate to discuss things. It's one of those words like toxic that is just, it's almost lost all of its meaning. But then when you examine the word gatekeeping and how it's being used, I noticed that people had different definitions for what the word meant. And it has kind of morphed, like language seems to be these days, where everything is just fluid now anyway, and we can just redefine what words mean. But gatekeeping is a popular word that has been redefined over and over again, it seems, to mean different things. So I wanted to examine what gatekeeping was, knowing that there are going to be people who are going to argue that it is not what gatekeeping is, and their particular definition of gatekeeping will be what it is. So all I can do is come up with my own, I guess, which definition do I agree most with, and we're just going to stick with that. So when we look at gatekeeping as a term, we go to the first place that I like to go to understand what an English word means, and that is just simply the dictionary. And Webster defines gatekeeping as, or a gatekeeper as, a person who controls access. That makes sense, right? Gatekeeping, and the term gatekeeper in terms of a hobby term, to me, has always been to restrict access to something, in this case, a hobby, wargaming, Warhammer, whatever hobby we're talking about. It's to restrict access to that, to control which individuals we want to let in and which ones we don't. Now, Cambridge University defines gatekeeping as the activity of trying to control who gets particular resources, power, or opportunities, and who does not. Okay, so that again comes down to controlling access, only this is being a little bit more explicit in what the goal is. It's to control resources, power, or opportunities. And you'll see that quite a bit. And in fact, some of the gatekeeping comments I have watched or have been levied against myself have been exactly that. It is an argument or a term used to attempt to disarm someone else because you don't want that person's opinion to pervade the official rules or the official, however the game is set up. So that's a form of gatekeeping. And I would say that's a natural proclivity for any hobbyist, that you like certain things and if you got into a hobby for a certain thing and it changes to something else, that may upset you, and you would be considered gatekeeping if you don't want it to change. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think gatekeeping is necessarily a negative word, but in terms of the hobby, I would say that most people consider being called a gatekeeper to be an insult. Now, what I did was I went out and I asked some people in general, what is gatekeeping? I also noticed a rather lively discussion on the Old World Forum or Facebook group where they talked about gatekeeping, and I picked some things out where people were defining what gatekeeping was. And what you're going to notice is when I go through these definitions of what other people say gatekeeping is, you're going to notice that there may be some grains of similarity between them, but oftentimes the definitions are very different from each other, which means, again, that we are arguing with people using a word but having different definitions or meanings as the other person, and then claiming our definition is the correct one. All right, so let's see. What did the internet say gatekeeping was? What did the internet or the Old World Forum say? So here's one. Gatekeeping is to make your interests exclusive in order to protect them from becoming mainstream. Now, that one actually didn't come from the Old World Forum. So you'll see something like that. Like with music, for example, people will have like their favorite heavy metal band and they want to gatekeep that band and keep others out of it to prevent it from being mainstream because they want that to be like their little band, right? Because once it becomes mainstream, then everyone likes them, and that kind of takes away, I guess, from being a fan. So that's one person's definition of gatekeeping. Here's another one. When someone takes it upon themselves to decide who does or does not have access or rights to a community or hobby. This goes back to the Webster Dictionary definition of gatekeeping. A person who is going to decide who gets to access the hobby or the community. Okay. That's a common definition that I see. In fact, that would probably lean more towards the definition that I always assumed gatekeeping meant. And in that case, that can be considered negative depending on what the rite of passage is, I guess, to being a member of that community. What is that exactly? A word used to describe when someone sets a standard or limit on what someone must do to call themselves a true fan of the hobby would be considered gatekeeping. Okay. A word used to describe when someone actively fights for a certain way that a hobby or edition of a game is enjoyable to them and to which they do not want that to change, i.e., complaining when one edition changes to another and complaining that the new edition is just not that good, or liking the new edition and complaining that the old edition players are gatekeepers, which you see a lot of. It's a preference for one thing, not wanting it to be another thing. Okay. A word used to describe when someone is complaining about how other people want to play things differently, which may turn them off to the hobby altogether. So this is one complaining about people complaining. That's a very common one. They also use that word toxic. I'm not going to go into complaining about complaining in this video, but if you've been around for a while, the internet, you know that's a thing where if one person makes a complaint, it'll spark 20 people complaining about that person complaining. And the last one, it's when one person or a group sets an unreachable or unrealistic standard for entry into their group. It's generally a way for a group to maintain either a self-assured sense of correctness or to limit entry into their hobby by newcomers who have not yet invested the time or money that they have into it. So an example of that last one. You may have seen this. I've seen this quite a bit, and I myself hold the same opinion. Player rocks up to the table and wants to play Warhammer or Battletech or 40K, or you pick a game, and they don't have any miniatures. They have cardboard tokens or Legos. And a guy who played Frostgrave with us a few years ago, and he got really mad at me because he was using Lego Star Wars in games of Frostgrave. And I didn't like that because it ruined my immersion to the game. I play the miniature games for the aesthetic and the immersion. That's part of it. And so unpainted miniatures are one thing that we deal with, But then having like cardboard pawns or Lego Star Wars representing fantasy models is another level. Am I gatekeeping when I say that? Yeah, that's gatekeeping. Do I feel that that's negative? No, because my enjoyment of the game is based around aesthetics. So I don't want to play people who are using Star Wars Legos to represent fantasy models. That's just my personal opinion. I don't enjoy that. So I will gatekeep on that. But that's an example of gatekeeping. Some other examples that I've seen rolling through. When I posted my video on model counts and what the different editions looked like a couple weeks ago, I had a person say or comment that that was wretched gatekeeping to them. Posting a video about the model counts was wretched gatekeeping because people didn't like the mega bricks of 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy. All right. I don't understand how that one is gatekeeping because I'm not restricting access to anything, but I'm assuming that the logic is because that sparked a discussion where people said they did not like 8th edition for that, and that person actively liked 8th edition, that they considered that to be gatekeeping. To me, that's not gatekeeping, but that's going to be my personal definition. That's not gatekeeping. That's being upset that other people don't like the same things that I do. Conversely, in the same thread, it was said that 8th edition, liking 8th edition, was a form of gatekeeping because of the infantry model requirement. It's gatekeeping because for a new player to play, they had to invest 2,500 points, because that was the standard back then, into a new army. And then on top of that, that'd be a lot of infantry models that they may not have liked. So that was a form of gatekeeping. So in the same thread, two people with two totally different likes, one liked 8th edition, one did not, said this was gatekeeping. Right? This goes, again, gatekeeping means different things to different people. The switch from 5th to 6th edition Warhammer, one was Hero Hammer, the other one was more army-based, is considered gatekeeping. If you like 6th edition over 5th edition, you were called a gatekeeper. And you were called a gatekeeper because Hero Hammer let people show up to play with 20 or so models. And now 6th edition made them have to have full armies, and they did not like that. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm not saying that if someone feels that way that they're bad or their opinion is not valid. Of course it is. But they're saying that that's gatekeeping because they're restricting access now by cheering for a game that requires more models is gatekeeping. Okay? Another one that we see quite a bit of. The desire for a more complex rule set and actively not liking simpler rule sets. For example, Age of Sigmar. One-page rules. Modern game design has, for a long time now, I would say for the better part of 15 years or so, stressed simpler game design because it's more accessible. And it is. And as a game designer, I will tell you, when I have to work on projects, that's usually always going to be in the manifesto that I'm given on what has to happen, and the game has to be streamlined or has to be simple. It has to have a wide base. And the reason that is because those are going to almost always be more commercially successful because there's more people that it can appeal to. Okay. So people who want more complex rule systems, and I'm one of those people. I don't really get into simplified abstract games very well. It's not to say I can't, but I prefer some type of crunch in the game. But we are considered gatekeepers because that requires rules mastery, and people in general don't want to have to read rule sets. They just don't. Okay, is that gatekeeping? Is that a form of gatekeeping? I'm not restricting access to anyone, and quite honestly, in today's world, you have really a cornucopia of simple tabletop games. Like finding a complex game is hard. You have to actively look for it and dig around for a more complex game than you do a simple game. So I don't necessarily consider that gatekeeping. I just consider that a personal preference of mine. Another fun one, guess range weapons. So up until 8th edition in Warhammer, you weren't allowed to pre-measure anything. So everything had to be visual. You had to know how far away everything was, even for charges. You could, when you declared a charge, you may have been out of range. And that was part of the fun for some people because responding to those charges was a big part of the game. So someone could stand and shoot you, and you weren't even in range to begin with, so they got free shots. Or you charge, they choose to flee, and they don't rally and they flee off the table, but you were never in range in the first place, right? But we don't know that because pre-measuring was not allowed. Okay, well, the problem I have, and this isn't really this, as that's called gatekeeping. If you like guess range weapons, that's called gatekeeping, or by a lot of people, because it favors people who have spatial recognition, who can look at a table, for example, someone who's a carpenter. They love guess range weapons because they can guess down to an eighth of an inch or even better every time. It was a trained skill that we had to do in the tournament group I was in because you had to be good at it. So it's something you can actively build on, but you could also cheat. There were so many ways around it. People would measure from their elbow to like the front of their finger and then lay that down on the table. Like, we knew what you're doing. If it's 29 inches or whatever from your elbow to the point of your finger and you're laying it down nonchalantly, you're measuring, you're using it as a tape measure, but you can't prove it, right? So if someone were to call you out, you could be like, I'm just sitting here. I don't know what you're talking about. And you couldn't prove it. And it caused a lot of arguments. And there was that, or there were people who would put like war machines next to each other, and then when one would shoot, they'd write it down. The one was a range finder basically for the other. The point being, there's different ways to get around guess range weapons to make it not even. To me, I don't care that it's not around because you could just circumvent it in so many ways. But it's considered gatekeeping if you like that kind of thing. I don't think that someone's restricted from the hobby. I just think if guess range weapons were a thing and you're not good at it, don't use things that require guess ranges, and or get better at guessing ranges, because that's what we had to do. Funnily enough, allowing pre-measuring has been also accused of gatekeeping. It's gatekeeping people with skill or something like that. I've seen, meaning like they built the skill and you're not allowing them to participate and use their skill, and everyone can do it. So that's gatekeeping. Game systems that don't use D6s. That's another fun one I've seen a lot of. That's gatekeeping. So, for example, like Warlords of Nowhere is a fantasy skirmish style like AOS. They're Rick Priestley's version of AOS, I guess. And it uses all D10s, and people got mad at that for using D10s because that's gatekeeping, because they have to go out and buy D10s when they already had D6s. Okay, so to them they're having access restricted. Is that gatekeeping? To me, no, like not really. It's like any game, like you need dice. So if you don't have dice, if I don't have D6s, I have to go get D6s as well, right? So I don't really see that as gatekeeping, but I've seen that levied. Another one, this one's a hot topic. This one's the last one. And let me preface this, but I don't care about this topic. It's a 40K topic. I don't play 40K, and I don't care about 40K. But there's a big to-do about having female Space Marines. And some people don't like the idea of female Space Marines for a variety of reasons. Gatekeeping. Somehow that's gatekeeping. I don't see the gatekeeping in that either, because females do have representation in 40K. There's a whole Sisters of Battle army that is all female. You can have female guardsmen, for example. There are females present in the game. So if you want to be female, you can do that. I think what it is that people want to have females as Space Marines because they like Space Marines. And because there are no female Space Marines, they call that gatekeeping. Like they're being restricted somehow from being able to play 40K, or they're being biased against or whatever. Again, I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't care. If they came out with female Space Marines tomorrow, I would shrug my shoulders and not care. And if they never have female Space Marines, I have the same emotional response, as in I don't care. So I have no dog in that fight, but that's called gatekeeping, among other things. So Anyhow, so what we've done is we've taken 20 minutes and just have gone through the word gatekeeper, defined how a lot of people use it, and a lot of different examples of what it's called gatekeeping. This is a word, again, that's used quite a bit to mean a lot of different things. There's a lot of people that will die on the hill of their definition is the only correct one, and everyone else is just dumb and doesn't know what it means. To me, I have accepted long ago that in the hobby space, words are fluid, and in today's culture, words are fluid, and definitions are allowed to be changed pretty much at a whim. And there's nothing you can really do about that. And people will fight for that. So, as such, my conclusion will be before you jump into an argument with someone about a word, find out what their definition of the word is. And if it's something wildly different than what you agree it should be, my suggestion to you is just to not even get involved in that conversation. You're not ever going to convince anyone. Again, debates and arguments are not almost always not there to be there to learn something. They're there to win. And even showing someone proof of something, they will double down in some other way to prove that your proof is wrong or is just stupid or whatever. So I'm interested in your opinion on what gatekeeping is. Maybe you have some examples you'd like to share. Please leave them in the comments below. I love reading those comments and having those discussions. So thank you guys for tuning in to this week's topic on gatekeeping. I look forward to seeing you again and pushing out another interesting topic to talk about in the very near future. Until then, I'll see you then.